Bismillahirrahmanirrahim wa sallallahu ala Sayyidina Muhammadin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. Peace and love. What up? I'm Brother Ali. It's a Travelers Podcast. You've heard me say over and over and over again, this episode is special. And I mean, we don't spend our time talking about and recording and producing and editing and preparing and uploading and just emailing and all this other stuff. We don't do this unless we feel that something is truly special. And we don't ask for your time unless we have something that's at least special to us. This episode is special because I'll give you a very quick history on this thing called Travelers Media, the Travelers Podcast. If you listen to this show, you already know. But BK1 is in a lot of ways my day one. He's the person who heard me rhyming and was aware of what I was doing on the mic and also who I am as a person, and really supplied a lot of support and time and energy and direction and encouragement and advice on how to bring who I am as a person more and more and more onto the mic. And then, of course, when I connected with Ant, we were able to do that on record. And then BK became my live DJ. And so he also helped show what I can do and who I am on the mic and really everything that I bring to the table. He helped me develop that so that we could do it live and present it live and win over audiences. If you haven't yet, please go back and check out the 2 episodes that we did with BK1. They came out about a year ago, where we talked through not only his history, but also our history together. And so we did about 10 years of touring together. And then BK left the road to develop a radio station, an anti-racist radio station in his specific neighborhood in South Minneapolis, right around the place where George Floyd was killed and kind of like the epicenter for the uprising in 2020. And so BK and I took about a 10-year break from working together. And then around that time of the uprising, my family and I moved to Istanbul. I left the record label, Rhymesayers, that I worked with for so long, the people that he actually introduced me to, and wanted to start this podcast, wanted to start my own platform, had all different type of musical stuff that I wanted to do, and just wanted to operate in a really kind of specific way. And so we reconnected around the time that I was launching all of this and decided to do it together. So for the past 4 years now, we've been partners every day working on developing our record label, our platform, our podcast, the way that we want to be in the world, the way that we want to be able to support what we do. Just a little bit of history. BK also, as a musician, as somebody who's classically trained, he played in jazz bands. He's somebody with a really wide and deep knowledge of music from a variety of different histories and cultures and genres. Just somebody who really, really, really knows music, and is incredible on the radio, incredible hip hop DJ, incredible mixtape DJ. Somebody that can, get on the turntables and perform as a DJ in a variety of settings. And eventually he made an album, his first solo album, called Radio de Carnaval, which is inspired by the music of Brazil, that he really orchestrated. And some of the greatest MCs of all time are on this album. So, Black Thought is killing it on this album, Scarface and Fonte, and, some of the most classic artists, both from our circle and from the history of hip hop in general. He also collaborated with some amazing artists from Brazil. He also, orchestrated a big, brass band to create a new composition. So there's a lot on that project. And then he came back a few years later and did a project called Bones and Beaker, which is him connecting with Tony Bones and making, I would say, kind of like lo-fi pop music with a hip hop aesthetic. It's a mixture of samples and live instruments. Super dope. Both of these projects are really incredible. And so now BK is offering an album called Blackbox Recovery. And it's music that he made. I'll let him tell the story, but it's music that he made during the pandemic completely by himself. I mean, he ended up bringing in some people to do some embellishments and things, but it's music that he generated from scratch on little electronical toys and instruments and devices. It doesn't sound like anything he's ever done before. The creative process was completely different and new. And he created something that's very, very unique and just different and special and amazing. And between us, I had to really kind of coax him to put this thing out in a real way on this label that we developed and created together. And as you'll hear when he talks about it, he wasn't looking to make money from it. He wasn't looking to, do a press run or like really shake up the world and let the whole world know about what he had going on. Whereas, when these other two albums came out, there was press around them. Like Rhymesayers Entertainment put out the first one. And also the second one, the Bones and Beaker Project, was put out by Wax Poetics. It's like a really famous, highly respected magazine and label. And he's put stuff out that has millions of streams, and he's done things that are known in the music world. This one was really very personal, and that's the way that he wanted to do it. And he said, rather than make money off of this, what I really want is to have conversations about it, about what it means to make music as a means of survival during the pandemic, and as a practice of mental health. And also, him as a working dad. He runs our label. He edits this podcast. He does all of the administrative and just support that keeps my career going, is all on him. And he's got a bunch of kids, and he supports also a really amazing wife that does incredible work. And when I say support, I mean, running the house and all this kind of stuff. Very interesting to look at things from that perspective. But then also, one of the things that I talk to him about is the fact that most people that are on the record label side of things, that are behind the scenes, most of those people at one point were musicians and wanted to be musicians. So we also talk about, like, what does it mean to continue a very vibrant and rich artistic practice where you're opening up new chambers of yourself and showing it to the world. All of that is part of the conversation around this. Now, you're hearing a conversation, but also for the people who buy this album that just drops today when we're releasing this, there's a very limited number. I think he said there's like less than 80 copies available, and then it's done on vinyl. Some of the songs will be streaming. You can go stream some of the songs right now. But the whole album, I think he's going to wait to drop the whole thing. But there's a Slack channel where you can communicate with BK1. The 80 or so people that buy this album will be able to have conversation around it. And the conversation is what he was really looking to get out of it, is like building community and having conversation around creativity and what it can really mean when you're not necessarily doing it to pay your bills and to be famous, but as a means of surviving, of building community, of connecting. That's what The Travelers is about. This Travelers Media, the Travelers Podcast. We are co-travelers on the journey of life. And in some ways we overlap perfectly. In other ways we really don't. But being able to connect as human beings, having human experiences, trying to live lives of virtue and meaning and beauty and goodness, where we interject beauty and meaning into what we're doing, and trying to leave the world a little better than we found it. And, just trying to live lives that feel worth it when it's all said and done. That's what this platform is about. It's what this podcast is about. It's what our work has always been about. And it's what our record label, Travelers Media, is about as well. So this is a conversation between two people that talk every single day, trying to organize things in a certain way. I hope you enjoy. We're brought to you, as always, by the Zakat Foundation. ZAKAT Foundation does incredible humanitarian work all over the world. They've sponsored this work from day one. In a lot of ways, they are the independent record label of, global humanitarian work. It's a small team of people that's able to pull off amazing things based on putting human beings first. They do a lot of things that, big global humanitarian orgs don't always do. that's really dope to us. And so we're very, very grateful to be in association with them. Go to zakat.org, Zakat US on social media. Check out the work that they do. It's a Muslim-led organization, but you don't have to be a Muslim to support them. They're not trying to convert people to Islam with this work. It just is the impetus for doing a lot of dope stuff around the world. So while you're listening to this, go check them out. Put something on something. There's things you can do for $5 that really do change people's lives. There's stuff you can do for $50, stuff you can do for $5 million, and anything in between. If you're listening to this on a device and you have enough food to eat today and probably tomorrow, you're doing better than most people in the world. But there are really dope, sincere, genuine ways to share what we have. And Zakat Foundation is at the forefront of trying to make that happen around the world. So go and check them out. Enjoy this episode of the Travelers Podcast with the editor of the podcast and the producer, BK1. So I want to tell you what my experience was of discovering this album. Mm-hmm. And then you tell me, because it feels like it's related to what your experience may have been like creating it. So you sent me, I don't know, months ago, a year ago, my especially between us, because we talk every day, like my concept of time is like totally out the window. But a while ago, you sent me what I thought was like a folder of beats. Like you sent me some music with no vocals on it. Mm-hmm. And I wasn't quite sure how to understand it. So because I usually have producers send me beats, I was like, am I supposed to rap on this? Or like, am I supposed to, like, what am I supposed to make of this? Because they were very like raw. It felt like when a producer sends you a folder of beats, like, hey, do you want to do anything to this? It didn't feel like music. It felt like beats. Mm-hmm. So I'm like, okay. Yeah, like, all right. And immediately I could identify that this was a different sound with different tools. But there are certain things, there's like certain through lines in everything going all the way back to when you were on the radio and, you know, making mixtapes and then the albums that you produced and even doing our sets, like our live sets together, where, you know, it's always, you know, it's always like lives in a certain world. And there are always like really dynamic, like you never do anything that's all the same tempo. You never do something that's all the same time signature. Yeah. You never do everything. But then always there's oddballs that if I just were asked to listen to that, I wouldn't want to. I'd be like, no, like there's always something challenging. That's what I mean. Like there's always something about it that's like, come on, man, don't make me listen to freaking whatever this is. And you do that when you cook food. You do that with like everything. There's always like a bunch of really pleasurable stuff that's just barely outside my experience. But then there's one thing that's just like, no. I remember the first time I ate tofu was with you. First time I was like, and you were like, miso soup. You're like, this is seaweed and tofu. I'm like, get the hell out of my face with this mess. And now I can't wait to eat it. You know, like I've had that experience enough times. Mm-hmm. So even this collection of beats was like that. It's like, okay, there's new stuff going on here. These are sounds that I usually don't like to hear. Like these like electronic kind of sounds. But I'm like, but this is not electric. This isn't electronic music. Mm-hmm. Like this isn't the music they play at the gym in Istanbul. This is like, you know what I'm saying? Like these are songs, you know? And then there was one thing that was just enough outside that was just challenging enough that I was like, all right, here we go. This is the one like this. This will probably be my favorite one at some point. So then you came back and said, okay, I'm making a project out of this, but you sent me a Dropbox folder. And most organized human beings would export all those to a playlist so that they could listen to them all the way through. But I never did that. So I still was listening to one song at a time that had to load, and I didn't get a concept of it. And then you said, okay, no, this is the actual album that I'm making. I'm like, oh, okay. I'm still out of left field. And then the next time I really heard it, like you put it in a like a SoundCloud thing that I could like hit play and listen to it as an album. Yeah. And before I got to do that, Ant hit me up and said, yo, Brendan made an instrumental album, because Ant is also releasing his first instrumental albums. Mm-hmm. And he's like, yo, Brendan is dropping an instrumental out and it is dope. And Ant doesn't talk like that unless he really feels that way. And he made a point to tell me like, yo, your guy made this really dope instrumental project. So I'm like, what the hell? So then I went and listened to it, and through those ears and in that lens and like finally being able to play it all the way through, I'm like, oh, okay, this is like really another chapter in your career as a musician. So that's the way it came together for me. And I get the sense that it, in some way, it reflects how it happened for you.
Yeah, yeah, you're not wrong at all. First of all, I'm just noting that the sun hasn't come up yet. You're in Istanbul where it's the early afternoon, but I'm recording this at the crack of dawn, which feels fitting because that's really like 5 a.m. is the hour that pretty much this entire record got made. And so there's something really sweet to me about connecting to talk about it for the first time right in this same hour. Um, but yeah, you're exactly right. Your experience of this really mirrors my own. As I was making it, I really didn't know what it was. And it took a lot of shapes and forms on its way to finding what it wanted to be and what it needed to be. And along the way, I tried things that I had done before. There were points in time where I thought, like each song needs a collaborator to be finished, in part because that's kind of how I've always worked.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Everything that I've put out before this new album, a Blackbox Recovery, has been a collaboration with somebody. And so I think it was kind of built into me to assume to think of these like you were initially framing them, like these are beats for other people to come in and finish. And the more time that I spent with them and the more that I just sort of plugged away at them, the more they kind of found their own voice and turned into what they are. And even, I listen to this record and I really hear strong themes that point to the time and the circumstances in which it was made and that are really evocative and sometimes vulnerable and sometimes, um, almost scary to share. But if I'm honest, you know, I didn't sit down and create them with those intentions in mind. Those themes sort of found their way into it naturally. And this collection just kind of organically became what it I guess wanted to be. And it wasn't until maybe 2/3, 3/4 of the way through that I, even as the creator, I was able to look at it and be like, wow, look what this has become. So yeah, as the creator, I think I had a very similar experience to you.
Like the origins of it remind me of like what I started doing with the Brother Minister series, like where I
Hmm.
make a beat, make a full little thing to hear, and it takes about an hour. I remember you saying that you like set a timer sometimes for yourself. I
Hmm.
never, like you're a way more organized person than me. So when I say it's about an hour, some days it was probably six. And I'm just like, well, that's an hour. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
To me, an hour is like however long I don't get distracted is an hour to me. But I started out doing those just because I needed like promos for the All the Beauty in This Whole Life album. The videos were taking too long and I wanted people to know like there's music. So I'm like, all right, let me rap on Instagram because that at least will get more clicks than just me typing that I'm making it, that I got an album coming. And then I just started doing them as like, oh, these are very therapeutic. Like they're, it's like a little piece of music that's just for me. There's no, I'm not going to turn these into the label. No, we don't have to worry about where do they go on the album. Is this worth whatever? It's just an exercise of creativity. Like I'm going to sit down, create something entirely from myself. And before I get a chance to judge it, it's going to be in the world. And I can do that because I'm just sliding it on somebody's timeline.
Hmm.
Nobody's going to judge it like a real song. So like there's enough context in there that like, hey, just showing up to rap a little bit. Don't worry, just as you were, like keep. Um, and so I think that you were saying that there was some kind of like meditative, therapeutic process during COVID for you to start these pieces.
Yeah, yeah. This music was really made in two parts, and the first part is what you're describing. The first part was probably a 3-month period that came right at the beginning of COVID. So before we had any answers, when the only prescription was lock yourself in your house, you know, and our family was relatively safe. We were in pretty good shape, I think, compared to the rest of the world. But all the same, I started getting a little stir crazy. It was scary outside. It was starting to get to me, and I needed something. I needed to introduce something to sort of ground myself and take care of myself. And so I started this practice fairly early on of waking up at 5 a.m. before anybody else in the house was stirring, going down to the basement, and then as time went on, sort of venturing out into the neighborhood. We live close to several parks, and sometimes I'd go work in the car or the backyard. Um, but like you said, setting a timer, usually for an hour, sometimes an hour and a half, always starting from scratch. And I just sort of had to deal with myself that this wasn't work. This wasn't a process of starting the next project.
Mm-hmm.
These weren't going to be songs to show anybody. Probably even music that I was going to revisit. These weren't going to be for collaborators. Most of the time, these weren't even going to get finished.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't about what I was making.
Right.
The point was to be making. You know what I mean? It was the process, not the result. And so, like I said, 3.5 months, almost every morning I woke up and did this and almost never looked back, which was important, I think, because I have a long history of endlessly tinkering with everything that I create, and
Mm-hmm.
usually not to the benefit of it, you know. And so there was something important about like, nope, this isn't about getting things perfect. It's just about sitting down and making something new. And then, the world slowly found its footing again and life resumed. And I didn't really look back for, I think, probably close to 3 years. And when I did finally look back and open up that folder and start punching through the files in there, I was really, really surprised by what was in there. And what I found was that because I was making these with no audience in mind, no destination in mind, I think I was really free of any expectations.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't burden myself with any boundaries or goals. And as a result, there's some really wild stuff in there that I found really exciting. It was, like I said before, some of it was really vulnerable. Some of it went into kind of dark places that I wouldn't have expected. There's genres and sounds popping up that are really different than anything that I've done before. And I found all of it, um, really surprising and exciting. And it's what inspired me to put time back into it and sort of finish things up. And that represents the second half of that work, which is just sort of combing through all of those files and finding, almost like record digging, just finding what are the pieces that really sing, pulling things apart and then reassembling them with other things that are in the collection. I love these drums, but the rest of this is trash. These two samples sounded really cool together, but I didn't really stick the landing. Maybe if I took this concept from over there and stuck it with this, and what if that went on top? Oh my God,
Yeah.
And so that's what the last year was. And, when you're describing me sending you things that kind of sounded like beats, a lot of that would be, the raw files that came out of that, that first 3 months. And I sent them to a couple people, and I could tell nobody, like when I was hearing them, what I was hearing was raw materials. And
You're right.
and I was like watering at the mouth. I sent them to other people and got a lot of what I got from you, which was just sort of polite responses like, oh, good to see you working again, because, I guess none of us really knew what this would become. Now that it's done and I'm sharing it with people, I'm getting really excited responses. And the most common response that I'm getting is, hey, can we go get coffee and talk about this? Which is just my favorite reaction ever.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, so I mean, you're obviously like a trained musician. Like you can play stuff. Like you can play instruments. You understand music theory.
Hmm.
You can compose. You can like you're a musician. And then, but then somewhere along the way, like it, especially through the hip hop context, being a DJ,
Hmm.
like you, I think that's how you discovered, or maybe other places too. But I know the part that I know about you is that you discovered that you're an extremely strong editor.
Hmm.
So like if somebody else starts the process, you can first of all see the potential in something very raw. Like me, for example, like I'm really encouraging people go listen to the early episodes. You know what I mean? Because you're the one that was like, okay, you can really rap, and you got a lot of cool stuff to say. If you start rapping about the cool stuff that you talk about and you figure out how to be yourself, like you could actually really do something. Like you saw that just even in terms of timeline before anybody really. So you're an editor, so you become like a really strong editor. And there's like a critical kind of piece of like looking at things as an editor, where you have to be like, this is the good part. These other parts are these other parts can get chopped, and we don't need to. So it's very different when you're in the when you're like the originator of it.
Hmm.
You know what I mean? Like when you're just starting with something and things are in the raw idea phase, you have to just be generally encouraging. Like, yeah, yes, yeah. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
So like when you first sent me stuff, that's why it wasn't polite to me. I was like, yeah, man, yeah, go. But like I didn't see any of the stuff you saw in it.
Hmm.
You know what I mean? And it was foreign enough to me that I was like, this is an audio language that I don't really speak.
Hmm.
This is like an environment that I don't really know anything about. So I can't offer anything other than, yeah, man, this is different. Go, you know. Um, but so it's really interesting that for you to be able to step into the space of creating, like you almost had to like turn that editor part of your brain off
Hmm.
and, disconnect it from outcomes completely. And I mean, me and you like I do a writing workshop together where we take people and encourage them in writing,
Hmm.
where it's like you have to develop a practice of just do it, do it, do it, do it, do it, because
That's right.
by you creating these like therapeutic kind of like almost like musical journaling. Like I'm just going to write in my journal and then I'm going to walk away.
Yeah.
No one's ever going to read this. No one's ever going to see it. No one's ever going to hear it. Like this is just for me to go. But like you also built the process of doing it. You built the process to the point where you could have a certain level of courage. And then coming back later and listening to it, then you're able to engage the other part of yourself. You know what I
Exactly.
mean? So from those early files until what it is now, it's like you built a new part of yourself where Radio de Cannibal is in a lot of ways a really developed mixtape.
That's right.
Or like you get into the world of Brazilian music that I didn't really know, but you get into the world of Brazilian music, came back with all these records. But because I know hip hop, when you played me the records, I was like, that's a beat. You're right. Oh, crazy. Da, da, da. But then you were like, okay, all right, I know that this music goes with these drums, and you put this rapper on it, and you got a song, and you knew how to direct that, execute it, all of that. And then even the stuff with Bones and Beaker was that way. But so for this part to be like a completely almost detached creative part where it's all of your stuff, how is that different emotionally? Because it's very revealing, and you weren't super happy. Like I had to convince when you sent me this and I got that message from Ant and you were like, yeah, I'm just going to sell these to my neighbors. I'm like, dude, we built a record label. Like you have a record label now. You know what I'm saying? You should probably put your music out on your record label.
Yeah.
And you're like, no, that's okay. I'm just going to kind of hide them in the woods and see if anybody finds them. Like
Yeah.
you are not trying to do that. And there's something where I'm like, oh, you're
Yeah.
more this is very vulnerable in ways that it wasn't before.
Yeah. I went through a whole journey in terms of the way that I thought about sharing this with people. And some of it came from a genuine place of wanting to experiment with just what is the relationship between creator, creation, and audience, and like I said, the conversations that have come out of this have been more valuable to me than any, dollars exchanged for the record will be. And so there is some genuineness in there, but I went through this whole journey in terms of what I wanted to do with the project. And at some point, I had to just kind of come to the discovery like, okay, you're bullshitting. Like, if we're really being honest, what's happening here is you're scared.
To be seen.
Yeah, I mean, to speak with my own voice through music.
Yeah.
Like you said, so much of, I mean, not so much of everything that I've put out before this project, first of all, has had somebody else's voice taking the lead on it, whether that
Yeah.
means their literal voice or, them playing the lead instrument or it's all, I've always built the frame and then put somebody else inside of it, and
And built a frame out of pieces that other people
yes.
that start with other people's work. Like you're revisioning other people's stuff.
Yes, so much of my creation process has always started with reaction, response. Finding samples that speak to me, and being like, I know what I could do with this, or sitting down with a collaborator and hearing a small piece of something that they're thinking of, and being like, let's zoom in on that, or like I said, responding. And I don't know that I could have made this record on purpose. I don't know that I could have sat down and had the idea, and then executed on it. I think it had to come this way. Like you said, there was two pieces of it, and the first piece of it needed to be nothing but freedom, nothing but encouragement, nothing but
Like judgment free, editor free. Like the editor
e-
brain has to
the editor.
cannot be engaged.
That's right. And if I had have known that someday I would be showing these to people, that I'd be
Yeah.
putting my name on them and
Yeah.
and putting them in the mail to strangers, I doubt that I could have done this. It
Yeah.
it took, what will be curious, to see is how much of this will inform what I do going forward. Like for example, I think one way to think about it is my superpower is still as an editor. I'm not at my strongest as a musician sitting down with a blank page in front of me. I mean, I'm thinking about so many of your songs where you had a life event or an emotional event in your heart, or
Mm-hmm.
something that you're observing out in the world that you just have a burning need to speak on, and like make the piece of art in your catalog that says that thing, or talks
Yeah.
about that thing. um that's never been me. That's never ever been me.
No. No.
And so, I look at this and I wonder, maybe a process that serves me well is when I sit down with a blank page, approaching it as a maximalist and just trying everything and just recording way too much material for it, trusting that the second part of it, when I come back
Mm-hmm.
to it and start pulling things away and start teasing out arrangements and start listening for, what's the kernel in here? What's the seed? And how do I give it the sunlight and the water and the healthy soil, and let it grow? So yeah, this whole process has been so interesting to me, and I'll be really curious to see how I can translate it into something that's a little bit more intentional with future music writing.
so much of what we do at Travelers Media is about the community that we build around what we're doing. From the days of us being on tour and standing at the merch table, talking to every fan while they were on their way out of the venue or on their way in, it's always been about that for us. And so now that we have this podcast, the caravan is how we attempt to, and in a lot of ways, succeed at creating community around what we do. So if you go to the caravan, the easiest thing to do is go to brotherali.com, sign up for the mailing list so that you know whenever we have stuff coming out. We do not drop stuff on you all the time. It's not weekly. It's just really whenever we have something that we want to share with you, we hit up our mailing list. But then if you go to the caravan, you'll see there's different levels to engage and to jump in. So for $5 a month, you get access to all of this unreleased stuff. There's a bunch of music, there's talks, there's video footage, there's podcast footage that we didn't put out on the main platforms. There's all of this stuff. There's a oral history of my demo tape, rites of passage. You can also listen to the demo tape, rites of passage. There's all kind of stuff that's either hard to find or you can't find it at all. And we kind of bring it all together for you because we want it to be understood and listened to and consumed and accessed by the people who get it, who understand the context for what that stuff is. And then the highest level of the caravan is a group called the Trailblazers, where we have a Slack channel where people really check in and do life together and share the experiences of our lives together. Most of the time that we release stuff on there, we offer it for free. That's just a place where people really, really connect and share life and share this music and share the intention of it all. It's a very beautiful thing. There's people on that group that have been in there for several years now at this point. And it's something that we're very grateful to be able to offer. So head to brotherali.com, sign the mailing list, get down with the caravan, and let's keep cultivating, curating, and supporting this music, this movement, this message. The way that this came together was also similar to what it's like having been so close with you all these years that I process everything out loud. You've heard every thought I've ever had about every subject that's part of our, you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And there's definitely been the word oversharing has come up. You know what I mean? There's times where I remember how close we were, how in each other's space we were all the time when I first met my wife. And I'm like, man, there's things that I maybe didn't need to say that over time, a lot of times we forget those things if we don't revisit them. But I'm like, yeah, I probably didn't need to say that part. But you have always been somebody that processes your stuff completely internally. And I don't even know about it until later. And it's not that you don't do it though. Some people just don't address their stuff. They just drink instead, or they just, watch football instead, or,
fight people.
Yeah. We just do anger sports instead. Yeah. But you do manage yourself and your emotions and you have ongoing relationships with it. You are intentional about it. You do give it attention. You do, you're aware, you know what you're doing. But I usually don't until later, until it comes up. And then it's almost like if I don't ask you directly, then I'm not going to necessarily even know about it. You've got 3 buckets of opinions. There's opinions that you're sure about, but unless somebody asks you, there's no reason to bother anybody with that. Mm-hmm. Or observations or realizations or whatever. And then there's ones that you're these feel important to share for some reason. Mm-hmm. And I don't, you know what I mean? And every now and then one changes categories where it'll be this is something I've been thinking for a long time and now it's time to say something. You know what I mean? We definitely have moments like that. And then you also have other ones where if asked, you're yeah, I've thought about this a lot and I don't have an opinion. Yeah. You know what I'm saying? But all of that happens internally and then it gets shared once it's done. So that's another thing that really strikes me about this. I didn't really even know that you were building something in there until
something that I learned through this process about songwriting is that you can talk about something that's very real without having to fully explain it.
Mm-hmm.
It's okay to take one piece of what you're thinking about
Mm-hmm.
and zoom way in on it,
Right.
and not have to contextualize it and
Yeah.
explain, like, you know, I also think things that are completely opposite of this.
Right.
Like there's a song on here that essentially is saying, again, in the earliest days of COVID, it's me exploring the idea, like, well, what if all the humans did die off? We're operating from this base assumption that that would be the worst thing in the world. What if it wasn't? You know, and which sounds pretty dark, and the way that I recorded it, I think it comes off kind of dark. The truth is that that's like one fleeting thought that I had amidst all that chaos.
Mm-hmm.
And it's, it was actually kind of a joyful thought, and it doesn't even really represent how I feel, but it was a real thing. It's a real thing that came up for me. And I found it
Yeah.
interesting enough that, like, well, let's just take that and let's chew on that for a minute and let's see what comes out of it. And I think my instinct as a creator or a songwriter or an artist or whatever, for the like 30 years that preceded it, was, you don't make a statement unless you can fully make a statement, and it's
Right.
precise, and it fully explains every facet of your experience of this, and
Yeah.
you know what I mean? And it's like,
Yeah. Yeah.
that's not very good songwriting. you know?
Your mom is an English teacher like that. Everybody that knows you knows that.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? And then also like yeah, like I mean, working around the rappers you work with book report rappers. You know what I mean? Like
Book
those are the kind
report
of
rappers.
yeah. Somebody said that recently. It was like, man, they're like, man, you and Talib Kweli and all that book report rap. And I was like, damn, all right, you win this round. You know what I mean? But it's like, rappers that are like, this is the song about this.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, there's really something very liberating and really like truthful about the idea that like this is a moment, like this is just a little vignette of a moment.
Yeah. Yeah, and like you said, like, I'm not somebody who tends to spill my guts.
Hmm.
Maybe sometimes to my own detriment. Uh, but again, this gets back to, like, I can point to songs on here that I'm fairly certain I would have never sat down to make intentionally.
Hmm.
Well, at least if I had known that somebody else was going to hear them. There's a song
Hmm.
on here that picks at the idea of, like, have I spent my whole life pushing people away? Um, and has it left me all alone? you know, and it's really kind of sad, and it's almost a little hard for me to listen to, but it's one of the songs that I'm most proud of creating in my career.
Yeah, man.
And it's scary, very scary. But I'm really excited to share it with people. So again, we're back into the, like, I'll be so curious to see what music making moving forward looks like for me. Like, can I take some of these things that happen by accident and make them part of what I do on purpose?
Yeah, I don't want to move on that from that one just yet. Like me and Ant always like we're not done until there's at least one song on the album that we don't actually listen to.
Wait, say that again?
Me and Ant aren't done making an album until there's one song on there that we don't listen to unless we have to work on it because it's like way too real,
Oh, okay.
way too emotional. You know what I mean? Like me and him are very very close the way that me and you are.
Yeah.
And so he's like, there's certain songs where he's like, I cannot listen to this fucking song.
Yeah, yeah.
And he'll cuss me out about it. You know what I mean? Like the way that he talks is very, you fucking piece of like, I can't listen to this. And he's like, it's a masterpiece. But I cannot,
Mm-hmm.
I hate listening to it. And
Mm-hmm.
like, cause it's so real. It's realer than most people, even me that like talks all the time. There's like a level of, there's a level of openness and like honesty, and there's like a filter that gets removed when you find or make the right music for something with the right, it's just like the emotion comes through that's in a way that's so pure that if anybody could speak like that, they would be a menace. Like, it's like you should not talk like this. There's something that happens in those 3 minutes of a song that's like beyond the person. It's like bigger than the person that made it,
Yeah.
And the idea that like, man, my kids are going to hear this and strangers are going to hear it and my friends
The
are going to
kids.
hear it.
Yeah. I thought a lot about that.
Dude, Merce just said that he made, like, I love Merce's podcast.
Mm-hmm.
It's like this is his number one listen to podcast, and he's my number one listen to podcast. He just did a live one where he was explaining that he's got this whole body of music where Merce has said all types of stuff. Merce has been every type of person there is on his music.
Yeah.
He's been a Christian, he's been a Rasta, he's been a gangster, he's been a skateboard guy, he's been a, you know what I mean? He's been a prophet, he's been a scumbag, he's been like, all of it is in there.
Yeah.
And he said he did his podcast to explain song by song so that his kids could hear the context for why he made each song and what he meant when he made it.
Wow.
I'm like, man, that's why I love this so much. Because I really felt like, with some people, like you said, like this song that you're talking about, what's the name of the Solitude one?
By Myself.
Yeah. So it's like, yeah, I know that about you. And I never really understood it. And like hearing it that way makes it's like, yeah, that's real. You know what I mean? Like I do remember one time we came over and I could tell you were in a place that you couldn't keep it to yourself. I was like, whoa, like he's really, like I was the first time ever that I was like concerned for you. And like me and your wife were like planning, we were like planning outings and stuff. I was like, should I take him camping? It's just like, damn, what do we do? Because that's so rare, you know what I mean? And then later on, you told me like, oh, that's not the worst it's ever gotten. I just didn't have enough space to get away from everybody and like process it on my own. Like it's been way worse than that. I'm like, damn, I mean, you know what I mean? So like hearing that song, I'm like, man, this really makes a lot of sense,
Yeah. That one I'm not as scared. It's funny that you brought up Merce. Merce has the song in my catalog that I'm the most embarrassed for my kids to listen to.
Yeah.
Like my kids have just in the last, like my oldest daughter is 13 and was like sitting in my lap through half of the creation of the Bones and Beaker album, and like she's the artist of my kids.
Yeah.
And so she's always been acutely aware and asks lots of questions and wants to come downstairs and make music with me, and we've written some songs together and stuff. But like just in the last 6 months or so is when collectively the three kids have all really become aware, like that I have albums out and that you can search my name and find pictures of me DJing and performing, and that it's a whole thing. And also now the oldest two have their own devices and like are finding their taste in music. And more than once I've walked in and heard them listening to my music, and I'm like, oh man, I need to sit them down and talk to them about a couple of these songs, because they fly in the face of the messages that I've conveyed as a parent. The one about that we've been talking about pushing people away, that one I feel pretty good about my kids hearing, because I think it's worth looking at yourself that way and considering these things and figuring out, what are our patterns and how are the ways that we might be hurting ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
That feels like a really healthy conversation. And I feel really healthy about this one about all the humans dying too. And I know how to talk about it, but man, not to say too much, but my oldest daughter can get in her head the way that I can.
Mm-hmm.
And from a young age, she has had some like real existential questions that really like mess with her. And I'm like, I don't know if she needs to hear this.
Yeah.
Not yet, at least. I think she needs to find her footing a little bit more before her dad starts making songs about, anyways.
Yeah. And I mean, and the song that you're talking about is like, that was me reporting on a moment where that's a thought that I had.
Yeah.
And if you understand that, this was in the beginning of a time when there were people saying that we're all going to die. Like this thing, we are all going to die. That was
It kind of
that
felt
was
like
one
it.
of the feelings in the air.
Yeah.
I mean, there were also people that were like, this is all a hoax. And then there was everything in between.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? And so you're reporting on a moment. Also, the song that you're talking about that Merce did for your record is him just making a joke.
Yep.
You know what I'm saying? Like it's just like somebody on the stage at a comedy club being like, let's see if this makes everybody laugh.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? And one of the conversations that you've engaged me on that so few people, because you do a lot of your work behind the scenes and like as an administrative, creative thinker about how do we take like what artists are doing and voices are offering
Mm-hmm.
and get them out into the world? Like how do we let the world know about them? How do we make them more presentable? How do we amplify other people's stuff and voices?
Mm-hmm.
So like whether it's I met you at a radio, you were a DJ and on the radio, and then you were my DJ and kind of A&R for a long time, and then started a radio station where you refused to make it about your own voice and vision of music creatively, like musically, artistically, culturally, because it was so intentionally like, this is about these people in this neighborhood that I live in who have been kept out of the process. I'm trying to stay out of it as much as possible. I'm just a servant.
Mm-hmm.
I'll handle the logistics. You say what needs to be said. I don't decide that. But one of the things about that, is that for folks that are in that role, like one of the tensions that I've always had is like, man, the rappers or the comedians or the, whoever the person is on the mic, so much of the electricity and energy around art or whatever is based on the fact that we're up here saying stuff. We're saying the quiet part out loud for a living. Mm-hmm. Like there's going to be somebody saying something or expressing something. Like I said, like whether it's a super, very, very personal thing that you wouldn't say in a conversation, or a lot of comedy and rap music and punk music and whatever is like, I'm going to intentionally say something we're not supposed to say. And that's where all the energy is going to come from. And that's going to make everybody be like, yo, this is crazy. That's where the electricity is going to come from.
Mm-hmm.
And I've just noticed, at a certain point that like, man, the artists are vulnerable in a lot of ways that the people behind the scenes a lot of times aren't.
Yeah.
There's a major disconnect a lot of times between artists and publicists and record label people and, I mean, tour managers. There is a us and them thing that happens.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Where like you see a lot of times, like I notice I'll go on tour with a big artist that has a big crew. Like my artists and in our crew, everybody in the crew is also an artist. Everybody's doing 5 jobs.
Yeah.
There's only 3 of us. Like we're all mixed into. But in a bigger kind of environment, it's like the guys in the crew get together and kind of talk about, they bond over the fact that the artists don't do any real work. And they're just, yeah, you got to baby them and,
Mm-hmm.
whatever. And then they all eat pizza and drink after the show. And the artists are all going to get wheatgrass shots. And like, there's a difference. There's a divide.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? And now I'm like, man, all those people that were attracted to this thing, it's because, I mean, the sound guy used to be a dope drummer. The guy that runs the label has made really dope beats or used to DJ, or like the so-and-so used to whatever. Now I'm like, man, maybe there's something to that. Like if the people who ran Spotify were making music and sharing their freaking hearts and were trying to put something out into the world,
Man.
they might think about it differently when they're like, oh yeah, let's just pay them let's pay them a 32nd of a cent every time somebody listens to their song. Or like, let's just make AI music. Like, can't we just make AI
Yeah.
music that people like to listen to on their run instead of having to, you know what I'm saying? Instead of having to
Pay
pay
humans.
pay Macy Gray something, you know what I'm saying? Like, why are we doing it? Like, there's not a question here. It's just something that I guess the question would be, um, how does this? How do you see maybe this informing? I mean, I feel like you've always been really tied into the creative process, but like, how does this impact your relationship with creating and putting stuff into the world, and the logistical part and the business part and the
Mm-hmm.
organizing part?
Mm-hmm.
And then also, what do you think about that as an idea, that like maybe we should be really encouraging that like everybody here should be doing something creative that they have to put out into the world?
Yeah. Well, the truthful answer of how does this change me? How will this affect things? I think that remains to be seen. Um, I guess what I can say at this moment is that a lot of conversations that you and I have had over the years suddenly feel a lot more real. You know, that moment where I discovered, like, oh, I see what's happening here. I've been putting all these fancy words and justifications around it, but what's at the heart of this is I'm kind of scared.
Mm-hmm.
As soon as I was able to say those words to myself, I immediately reflected on a half dozen conversations that you and I have had in the last couple of years, and immediately was like, I get it. I get it. And this body of work isn't even saying anything um, that's like directly challenging listeners. To, you know what I'm saying? Like, you've put work out that you go into it knowing, like, man, some of my diehard fans are not going to like hearing what I have to say about this, but it needs
Right.
to be said. You know, there's nothing particularly dangerous or controversial. Um, I'm not putting myself really at risk. I'm just sort of like opening my rib cage and exposing my heart a little bit. And even that, I'm like, oh, but I'm scared, you know? So there's just an appreciation there. And I think that speaks to the second question, uh, which is to say, yeah, it probably would be good for everybody. There's in recent years, there's been a lot more books that are sort of written, books and think pieces, and probably endless podcasts. And I think it's just a more common and popular conversation to talk about sort of where artistic, creative thinking and more like business, practical organization, leadership kind of
Mm-hmm.
qualities, like where they can and should overlap. Our shared friend Susan Campion and the Giant Step series that she did for years was kind of dedicated to that. There's a fantastic book that's kind of like half biography of Jim Henson, the guy behind the Muppets.
Oh,
Um, it's like one half biography and one half like what are the lessons that we can learn for business about the way that he built his empire and what he would and wouldn't do and how he structured things to make sure that the creative core of things was never compromised or never put in a position where there was a push and pull between that and like the financial reality. And
mm.
I think there is a lot more discourse around that kind of thinking, and I'm totally here for it. It's not an area where I feel like an expert, but yeah, I would love the folks running Spotify to have to put music out into the world. I think it should almost be required.
Yeah. The second you say therapy, the people that need therapy and don't want it, automatically their ears turn off. And I get it. I understand. It's really a generational thing. You know what I'm saying? Like the newer generation have come up on social media and they have almost like one extreme. My wife's a therapist. And so she says, like, a lot of times people in their 20s come in self diagnosing. They want a diagnosis so that they can have some understanding for what they're struggling with. You know what I'm saying? Because on social media, there's so much exposure to this kind of language that sometimes people honestly fake the funk and misdiagnose themselves and others, you know. And that's one end of the spectrum, but they are really aware of it. Whereas, like, people in my age, I'm in my 40s, you know what I'm saying? Most of the people that listen to us are in their 30s and 40s. And for us, like, we came up with a stigma around that stuff. And we came up watching The Sopranos, watching Analyze This, watching movies, Woody Allen movies or whatever, where someone is sitting with their analyst and that person is, you know, breaking down all this stuff. A lot of times we have an aversion to therapy because we just don't understand what it is. And therapy can be everything from I'm hearing voices, which is extremely rare, all the way down to I just need somebody to talk through these arguments I'm having in my head with my ex or with this person that I used to be close with, or, you know, why do I seem to keep having these certain cycles, or why is it so hard for me to stop eating junk food or abusing porn, or why is it so hard for me to stick to the stuff that I want to do? Why is it so hard for me to talk to these certain people? Uh, you know, just wanting to have some understanding of our own selves. You know what I mean? To have somebody support us in our understanding of what's going on inside me. All of this is under the banner of therapy, under the canopy of therapy, and a lot more, you know. Everybody's got their own reason that brings them to it, but I'm a big proponent of just try it out. It seems weird, and I do think it's weird. I think that in a natural society where people lived with their families and their communities and everything, we wouldn't need something like this, you know. But because we live in the societies and cultures and way of life and pace of life and everything else, a lot of times we do need somebody that we can talk to. So I think everybody should have the opportunity to at least give it a try. And BetterHelp is really good for doing that. That's what I use for therapy. So betterhelp.com/travelers. You start out by telling them what you want to do in therapy, what's bringing you there. Then you talk to them a little bit. You answer some questions about, is there a certain kind of therapist you want? Do you want to, you know, you're really in control. And they try to find you somebody that's a good match for you. You set up a session for them on your time, the way that you want to talk. And if you like it, you keep talking to that person. If you think they might not be a match, then you can switch. And in between time, you just share what you feel like sharing, and even just use it as a little brief kind of check-in point. And when you use our link, which is betterhelp.com/travelers, you'll get a discount on your first month. And also, we also get a little something on our end because we help make the connection. So it's a win for everybody. Couldn't suggest it more highly. If you haven't done therapy, if you think it's stupid, if you're a little bit scared of it, just give it a try, because once you try, you will always be able to say, I have tried therapy. Yeah, I did it. You know what I mean? You don't have to tell all your deepest, darkest secrets. Uh, Maybe just talking about something that just mildly irritates you and see how you feel talking to that person. You might end up going further with it. You might realize that, you know, I think I'm good. But either way, everybody deserves to understand what this therapy thing is and at least have an experience with it. So betterhelp.com/travelers. One of the things that I thought we always agreed on is, like, there's certain sounds that we like and certain sounds that we don't like.
Hmm.
And you know what I mean? Like, when we first connected, it's because we like 90s hip hop music
Mm-hmm.
and 80s. And, you know, before that, we loved the neo soul thing that was coming out at that time because of the sounds they were using.
Mm-hmm.
Um, we love jazz. We love blues. You love punk. I didn't know anything about punk, but I'm like, I know that's the not corny rock.
Mm-hmm.
I know that the way it sounds gritty. It sounds real. It sounds organic. Like, you can smell it when like, it's funky. There's like, it's very raw. You know what I mean? And then we bonded on things like, man, we love Bill Withers, but the production's too clean.
Yeah.
You know, the Bill Withers live record, that's the one because the
That's the
production's
one.
not too clean. Like, uh, Luther Vandross is dope, but we don't like those sounds.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? I thought that's what we always.
Oh no! Did I betray a trust?
No, I'm saying, but then like, so when you first sent me that stuff, I was like, so wait, these are all like electronic instruments, and I do know in theory there's a way for those to be good, but I feel like this is a good time for you to explain yourself, and then also just like like how the music actually got made. So I didn't realize that I know there's like one little black box. There's like the part of the double entendre of the name. But I didn't realize you were doing it outside. I remember when you were in Turkey, you were like, oh, I think I'm gonna go sit in that public garden and make music. I was like, oh, that's okay. Yeah, that sounds cool. But I don't think I realized that like you had this little device that you could take out into the world and like get out of your space. But yeah, I mean, there's a lot of like electronic sounding gadgets and you know what I mean? This doesn't sound like anything that you've done before. Those all sound very 70s soulful.
Yeah, yeah.
Joni Mitchell, you know what I'm saying?
Yes.
This feels like sonically like you got into a place where, and it's interesting to me that that's the one where you opened up because I feel like that's not your native language.
I hadn't thought about that. That's a really interesting point. Yeah, you're not wrong.
And maybe that helped. Like maybe, you know what I mean? Maybe it's like, I don't know. You know what I mean?
It could be. It could
Whereas
be.
like if you sat down with a Fender Rhodes, you're like, I know the chords that sound good on this. You know what I mean? Whereas like all these little electronic gadgets, it's like, let's see what this does.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the truth is, maybe I shouldn't admit this, but the truth is that like every major release of mine, from mixtapes to, you know, Radio de Cannibal, my solo album that I put together with Benzilla, the Bones and Beaker project, there's always an element of me doing something that's a little beyond my abilities. You know what I mean? I don't release albums using techniques and tools that I've already mastered. It's usually, this is the stuff that came out of me trying something that I'm still figuring out and experimenting with. And that drives some of the creation and some of the experimentation. And I kind of love it that way. And you're not wrong either that there's a trajectory. You know, I've made music that covers a lot of different genres and sounds, and as you said before, tempos and time signatures, and you know, I've tried a lot of different territory, but there is kind of a through line from the early mixtapes through the hip hop album to the like pop singer songwriter thing of Bones and Beaker, that it's me taking sort of traditional hip hop aesthetics and equipment and techniques and seeing what, you know, like what are the limits of what I could do with this. And on this new one, in a lot of ways, I mean, you know, there's still plenty of sampling. There's still plenty of, you know, hip hop techniques that show up on this new album. But there's also a lot of tools that I think are kind of more traditionally from the world of like electronic dance music and like down tempo. And there's so many subgenres and places that I don't really understand. That's not a language that I know. That's not music that I listen to. And to be clear, this is not an EDM album.
Yeah, I'll make sure to say that at the beginning, like in the intro, because yeah, it's not. Yeah, like I said, like this is not the music they play at the gym.
Yeah. But I will say that a lot of the tools that those folks use, I had been in the sort of years leading up to this, had become a little bit more interested in. You know, Teenage Engineering makes this little, it's halfway between a toy, like an art piece, and a really serious piece of musical equipment, but it's called the OP1. And POS had it and showed it to me in his garage one day. and within a week I had one. I just had to have it. And it, for me, it was really kind of a gateway to a lot of other music tools and ways of thinking about composing. And in the years since I've gotten it, I've heard that exact same sentiment from a lot of people, that it's a
Mm.
gateway into synthesizers and drum machines and all these things. When COVID hit, I engaged in a little bit of like retail therapy, and not like giant purchases. This isn't like the synthesizer version of like freaking out and buying a Maserati or something.
Hmm.
It was just a lot of buying like $60, $70 like battery operated music toys, but that are capable of doing some pretty cool things, you know. And
Hmm.
it's so like Korg makes a whole series of synthesizers called the Volcas. Um, what else? Teenage Engineering has these little like they run on, I think, one AAA battery, and they're literally the size of a calculator, like a little pocket calculator.
Yeah.
And each one of them does like one thing. Like this one is a bass synthesizer, and this one, you know, is a little drum synthesizer, and this one is a, you know, whatever. And I just bought a number of those things and kind of fell in love with step sequencing, fell in love with this idea of programming different instruments to loop at different lengths so that, you know, or like putting conditional triggers on things so that like I want this sample to play, but only 63% of the time. And I don't choose which 63%. You know, there's a certain amount of randomness to it. And
Hmm.
so like I can set up all these conditions and rules for how things are going to work, but then once I hit play,
Yeah.
it's my music, but it's a little out of my control, and
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
it evolves as it goes. There's a certain like lopsidedness to it that I've always been attracted to in music. Um, and so, yeah, like I said, I think these are all sort of tools and techniques that are typically associated with dance music, electronic music, and those aren't really areas that I'm all that interested in listening to or creating for.
Hmm.
But those techniques and the way that they made me think about music, um, really played a role in shaping the music that is on this album.
So it's mostly like, it's weird. Like I can't tell the difference between what's a sample and what you played.
Man, that's something that showed up in a lot of the reviews for the Bones and Beaker album, and that was my favorite thing ever to read.
Yeah.
When people would say, I can't tell where the samples end and the live musicianship begins, that just made me so happy. Um, I think it's a little bit more clear on this new record, because, you know, like whenever you're hearing like synthesizers and drum machines and things like that, it's me. Um, well, I guess now that I'm really
Because there's like
pulling.
a kalimba thing. There's kalimba sounding stuff. Like I don't know the names of even
Hmm.
real instruments,
Hmm.
but there's stuff that sounds kalimba on more than one place.
Hmm.
And I'm like, this could be either one.
Yep. Yep. Yeah, I played. Yeah, there's for all the drum machines and synthesizers on this, I played piano, I played kalimba. I brought in a friend who put together a really lovely horn arrangement on things.
So the horns are not samples.
No, no, that's my friend Steven.
See, that's what I'm saying. Like I thought those were samples.
Nope. Um, but the stand up bass, that sort of drives that song forward, that is a sample.
Mm.
Um, the drum kit on that is a combination of like half samples and half programmed drums. Yeah, so there is really a marriage here. You know, the black box, the piece of equipment that it's literally called the black box, the piece of equipment that's sort of at the center of all of this, um, is it's kind of a DAW in a box and a synthesizer and a sampler and a step sequencer, and you know it can do granular synthesis, and It's got built-in effects and all these different things. And because of its versatility, I was able to really mix like organic acoustic instruments and voices with things that are a lot more electric and programmed and, you know, squelchy, bleepy, bloopy. Um, and if to me, to my ears, it's a lot easier to tell what's real and what's not, what's sampled and what's played versus some of my past work. But if you can't tell, then I'm going to take that as a compliment.
I remember when the Reflection Eternal album came out
Mm-hmm.
and High Tech was doing all kind of stuff. I remember me and you talking about that record and being like, that's somebody playing the guitar, right? You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And I think there's very little instrumentation on that record. Even the one of the things that he really, I think, did better than anybody, especially in that time, is like filtering a bass note and like filtering certain, like his filtering and the way that he did filtering. You know, like the blast that you pronounce my name,
Mm-hmm.
Quali. I mean, that's the don't keep on dancing, don't keep on dancing, don't. Like,
Mm-hmm.
man, but the way that he manipulated that thing, it's like you would never know. Like, yeah, there was that's so dope to me. You know what I mean? That when you really marry them that well, I think Ant is really good at that.
Mm-hmm.
Dre is probably the best ever at it, but
Yeah.
yeah, man, that's it. Yeah, I had no idea. I just assumed the horns were samples, and but the kalimba I can't tell. So when you say you played the kalimba, like you played a keyboard sound of a kalimba, or you got a real kalimba and mic'd it and.
I've got 3 kalimbas, and there's a company that makes kalimbas that have a built-in pickup and then have a like a 1/4-inch jack on the back so that you can just plug them straight in instead of having to mic them. And this, I've got 3 kalimbas that I bought around the time of the Bones and Beaker project. You hear kalimba show up on the Bones and Beaker album a bunch too.
So kalimba, for people that don't know, is like it's like a little kind of like a, it's like a wooden block with these like metal things coming out of them, and you flick them with your thumbs. You're gonna play it to let people hear it? Yeah, you play it with your thumb, and then it makes a sound that like it makes a musical sound, and like you can do a whole production on it. Do you have to tune those?
Occasionally.
You have to, right?
Yeah,
Right.
they need to be tuned every now and then, especially if you travel with them. That's another instrument that I certainly don't feel like a master at. But in some ways it serves my purpose well, because it means that I do things. Some, you know, like piano is the instrument that I'm the most knowledgeable and comfortable on.
Mm-hmm.
But as a result of just years and years and years of theory, sometimes I get in my own way because my fingers already know where to go.
Yeah.
They know the correct thing to do. Like this chord wants to resolve to that chord. And, you know, like it keeps me from just doing things just because they sound cool, you know?
Right.
And like I have to almost create techniques and workarounds to like get out of my own head and let things happen accidentally. The nice thing about having an instrument like the kalimba that I'm certainly not a master at is that there's a lot more happy accidents. You know, there's a lot more experimentation, and then like, oh, that was so cool. And I couldn't explain to you what it was or why it was cool. I just know it sounded good and I want that, you know.
So we made the Love and Service album, and it wasn't completely different. It's a similar ethos. Like so far, the stuff that we've released on our label is like I did the Love and Service album, never met Unjust before.
Mm-hmm.
He sent me a bunch of beats that were kind of weird, but I really liked how they felt. So I'm like, yeah, I'm gonna do this little cool side project when I first moved to Turkey. And I will rap to these beats for whatever is gonna soothe me through all the stuff I was dealing with.
Mm-hmm.
But then it turned into an album that we really loved. Like when we got to the end of it, it was like, yo, like we all loved it. And so we poured way too much money into it, but we did it exactly how we wanted to do it. And the idea became, okay, let's price this so that if we sell them all, we make our money back.
Mm-hmm.
Because that means that we won. Like as artists, as independent artists, where nobody was asking for this music and we didn't even really intend to make it like this, but it was so beautiful. Let's just do it exactly the way that we want to, and then price it where like whoever wants to be part of this, basically what you're doing is making it possible for us to do. That's why we're asking you this price.
Mm-hmm.
It's like we made X amount of these. If we sell them all, we get our money back. And then that's really what happened here for you. So we have like a very limited number of them. They're not cheap, but I mean, they're also not, the price isn't crazy. Like, do you want to say the price?
Yeah, we're charging $40 for them. You know,
Okay.
we pressed up
For some reason, I thought it was 70, but okay. 40 is-
70? No way.
Yeah. I'm saying like for something that there is such a small quantity of,
Yeah.
you'll see it on, I'm saying within a year, somebody will be trying to sell it on eBay for 100.
Sure.
But yeah, $40 is really inexpensive for a piece of vinyl. It's right in that sweet spot of like, it's not, it's not $30, but it's not 70.
Yeah. So we pressed up 100 copies of this. I gave about 20 of them away to folks, tucked a couple into my collection, and then the rest will sell. And once we sell through them, we will have broken even. This was never a project that was meant to help me pay my bills. So the financial return isn't the motivating factor here. The thing that has given me the most, the return on investment of those months of creating this music and then the year of assembling it all and turning it into an album, the return on that investment for me has been the conversations that have come out of this.
Mm-hmm.
Once it really kind of found its form and I started sharing it with people, I think I mentioned this earlier, but so many different people had their first response has been, when can we sit down? I have so many questions I want to ask about this.
Yeah.
And I just love that. That's given me so much energy. And the conversations have really been different from person to person, in part depending on kind of where they're approaching it from. The musicians have wanted to know a lot more of the like inside baseball stuff of how did you do this and what is that sound and what made this do that. Other folks have wanted to know just, like, can we talk about that concept of using art as a survival tool in dark times? And some folks have been most interested in the back half of the project, where it's like you have this going on and this going on, and you have a family of 5 with 3 young kids that I'm constantly seeing you shuttle around to this and that. Like, how did you find the time to chip away at this thing and get it done? Just in a practical sense, like, how did you build a sustainable artistic practice? And these are all conversations that I'm here for. And so part of the release of this album, something that we're trying out, is that I want to continue that. That's been with my friends and my family and my neighbors. Now I want to see what that looks like with strangers.
Mm-hmm.
So we've got roughly, 80 pieces of vinyl that we're going to send out into the world. And along with that vinyl and the digital download, the other thing that you're getting access to with that purchase is that I'm going to open a Slack channel for 1 month and invite everybody who buys the album to join that. And in that space, I'll talk a bit more about the process and the thinking behind certain things. There's a lot of like iterations of songs. It's not just like demo and then done. Because these all started with sketches, there's a lot of me seeing like, does this and this fit together? Does that and that fit together? And I think even as the creator of these things, I still find it really interesting going back and looking at different ways that these songs could have turned out, ideas that I tried, that I really loved but weren't right in the context of the bigger piece, songs that didn't make it, songs where I think the instrumental arrangement is really interesting, but then I put all this vocal stuff on top of it, and so I'd love to just share the instrumental and hear people think about all the different things that are happening underneath the surface. And all of that will happen in that Slack channel space, as well as, I hope, a lot of great questions and observations and personal reflections. And I'm looking to scale up these conversations that I've been having with my neighbors and friends over the last couple months. I have no idea how that'll go, but I'm so excited and curious to see.
Yeah, I mean, that's a big part of what we do. You know what I mean? And it's weird. I think it's a combination of like that we used to hang out. We used to tour together. I mean, we toured together for 10 years and hung out at the merch table. And there'd be a bunch of drunk people that just wanted to say, "What up, man? You freaking killed it." But then there'd be people that would really want to know everything from like, were those the drums from the Jay-Z thing? Like playing underneath like rainwater or something, and you'd be like, "Yes, I can't believe you noticed that." You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And like, or all kind of stuff, like real like conversations with people. And then once me and you start, like, we built this entire record label on voice notes because that's just how I communicate.
Yes, we did.
Um, and so like we've really made that part of like Travelers Media. So our main subscribers, like our top tier kind of like patron caravan subscribers, all communicate with each other in a Slack channel. We just use Slack because you can do voice notes without having to give everybody your personal phone number and everything. But yeah, then the Blood on Beats like songwriting workshop, you know what I mean? We've got those weekly like 2-hour sessions, but most of it happens in there. You know what I mean? So like it's really dope. Like when you said that you wanted to do that, like I think it's a really, really, it's becoming such a key thing about what we do that like we don't like, yes, we want to give you our music, but we also want to talk to you about it. And we want to hear like your reflections on it and allow people to create community around it. You know what I mean? Like there's people from our Slack channels that make music together and hang out together and, all kind of stuff that like, man, that's something that we're doing that I imagine there are others that are doing it, but using this technology to really help forge relationships and build like a online community is, that's a really beautiful part about this whole thing.
Yeah, there's a lot of joy in that.
Yeah. So yeah, man, this like I'm really glad that you made the music. I'm glad that you are sharing it. I'm glad that you're talking about it. I personally feel like, you should keep the door open to keeping that Slack open longer. I feel like, once people discover the record, like I think it should remain available some kind of way for people to buy in the future. You know what I mean? Like whether it's the same packaging or not, but yeah, man, it's really dope for you for us to be so engaged in the work and see you continuing to be a musician and to be an artist and to actually grow in it. Not just, like I know that there are still like sometimes people will still get out and DJ sometimes or whatever and get the band back together, but like to really open a new part of your creativity and musicianshiphood, you know what I mean, and still have new openings and still be discovering entire new things. Like, man, to me, that's what this part of this like chapter of our work together is really about. So it's really dope. It really means a lot to me.
Thank you. Thank you.
Special thanks to BK1. I mean, it is his job. He's the producer of the podcast. But it's really dope to me that we get to release our music, that we built something together. We built a platform where we can release our music on our terms, in our way, and that we also have this podcast to be able to share it. And I think that his story is one that's important for people to hear because you can invest a lot into music and not necessarily have the career where you're going to spend your life touring the world. I mean, very realistically, the role as my DJ would have been his job for as long as he wanted it. And if he wanted to come back to it, he could. So he does have that opportunity to still travel the world and be on stage and do all that kind of stuff. And he actually selected not to do that anymore because of what his family and community mean to him. But the fact that he's still found ways to open up new creative elements and chambers within himself, and then find a way and create a way to share it with the world is really dope. This is a very, very special thing. And so I hope that this story has inspired somebody that, creating art is important in and of itself. And the measure of success isn't about necessarily whether or not you can feed yourself with it. It's not necessarily about whether the public and the audience, the whole listening music world knows who you are, because Brennan has had that. And if he wanted to do that again, I'm very sure that he could have found ways to do that. But there's something really important about just making the statement to ourselves and to each other that, because I'm a human being having a human experience, it's a good thing for me to explore that and to share it. And then to find a way to share it that feels genuine and true and sincere and connecting and thoughtful and intentional. And it's dope. Like we have, I think, the greatest life imaginable for who we are and what we care about. And the fact that we get to do it together, and that we've created a platform that he was doing it out of service to me and my message, but to be able to say to him, yo, you built a record label, put your record out on your record label. It's a beautiful thing. And thank you all, especially to the Caravan, but thank you to everybody that supports this, whether you just listen or if you like, share, subscribe, all that stuff. If you are part of the Caravan in any way, if you signed our mailing list, I want to tell you we got really dope, really big announcements coming very soon that you don't want to miss. So hit that mailing list, subscribe to everything, like everything, share everything. We appreciate you all a lot. Travelers Podcast is produced by BK1 for Travelers Media. We love you all. We'll see you next week, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.